What I have for you today is an interesting case from Canada, and it involved the companies Matco, Dean's Knight, which was formerly called Forbes Meditech. And as you can see, the decision is from the Canadian Supreme Court with interveners from the Attorney General of Ontario, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, the Tax Executive Institute, or TEI as they're known, and the Agence de Revenue du Québec. So clearly a case that raised some interest. Let's see what went on. You had a company called Forbes Meditech Inc., which was later renamed to Dean's Knight Income Corp, and which was the appellant in this case. And it was listed on NASDAQ, and it had a drug R&D and food additives business, and it had tax losses of around $90 million, which meant that things were not going good. The shares were of such low value that it risked getting delisted. So it reorganized itself in early 2008, and it put NewCo in between itself and the shareholders, and they were looking for ways to monetize these tax losses carried forward in the hope to have some value from it and to remain listed on NASDAQ. And then you had on March 19, 2008, you had first a director of Matco, Alan Ross, buying 100 shares of Forbes Meditech Inc. for $10. Clearly the shares were not worth a lot at the time. And then you had Matco concluding an investment agreement with NewCo, the new shareholder, and the investment agreement had the following conditions. First of all, NewCo would get $3.8 million for under the investment agreement, and that was split into $3 million for a convertible note, which Matco would give $3 million to Forbes Meditech Inc. in exchange for 35% of the voting shares, and it could be converted into 35% of the voting shares and 100% of the non-voting shares. There was also a price guarantee to NewCo that the remaining shares could be sold to Matco for $0.8 million, and that then all the assets of Forbes Meditech Inc. would be moved to NewCo so they could bring in a more profitable business into Forbes Meditech, and then Matco would have 1 year to present Forbes Meditech Inc. with a corporate opportunity so it could make money to eat up its losses basically, and Matco had to basically approved all other activities of Forbes Meditech Inc. What is important to note here is that Matco at this stage do not get the other 65% of the voting shares of Forbes Meditech Inc. And NewCo does not have to sell it to Matco, right? Then in December through March 2009, Matco found a solution and stripping the structure as we see it of now, so it's a little clearer. What happened was Forbes Meditech sold all its assets to NewCo as was agreed under the investment agreement, and then Dean's Knight Capital Management, a mutual fund manager, came on board through Matco, and it became the managers of Forbes Meditech Inc. And the preconceived idea was Forbes Meditech Inc. would make a IPO by issuing 100 million shares, 100 million by issuing 10 million shares of $10 each, giving Matco's value of each share is approximately 4 million for what it just paid, 3 million, right? And then what Forbes Meditech Inc. did was he bought corporate debt securities for that $100 million that it raised. So it was financed with equity largely, and it bought interest yielding debt, high interest yielding debt. So it was more or less guaranteed that it would get some income unless its debtors defaulted, and for that it could use the tax losses, right? And then between 2009 and 2012, the appellant, or Forbes Meditech Inc., which was now renamed Dean's Knight Income Corp after its management with the Dean's Capital Management Fund, already wiped out 65 million of that 90 million. But Revenue Canada did not agree. Revenue Canada said, we're sorry, but there's been a change of ownership here, and you cannot make use of the loss carry forwards. The moment you change the ownership and change the business, those losses go out. And Matco very much tried to structure the deal in such a way that this would not happen. So just to look at the final roundup, just before the IPO, Matco actually exercised all it converted its convertible loans, so it got the 35% voting shares, 100% non-voting shares of Forbes. It then also went and bought the other 65% of the shares that Newco held at the time. For another 0.8 million, like I said. But remember, there was now already 100 million shares issued to external shareholders, right? So pre-IPO, there was a conversion note, and Matco got the voting shares and non-voting shares. And then in April 2009, after the IPO, it exercised its right under the guarantee amount and got the remaining of Newco shares. But there were already 10 million other shareholders or shares issued through the IPO. A 10-second commercial. If you want to learn more about international taxation or transfer pricing, or treat yourself to an all-round update, or if you want your team to learn or stay updated, please visit my online courses. If we look at what the anti-abuse rule says, it's Article 111 of the Income Tax, paragraph 5, where at any time control of a corporation has been acquired by a person, no amount in respect of its non-capital loss for taxation year ending before that time, so before the acquisition, is deductible for a taxation period ending after that time, except that such portion of the corporation's non-capital loss for taxation year ending before that time may reasonably be regarded as its loss from carrying on a business, and where a business was carried on by that corporation in that year, such portion of the non-capital loss may reasonably be regarded as being in respect of an amount deductible under paragraph 110, and only if that business was carried on by the corporation for profit or with a reasonable expectation for profits, right? And then there's a second paragraph saying only to the extent of the total of the corporation's income for the particular year from that business. So if there was a change of control, then only to the extent that the old business or a similar business was carried on could you make use of the pre-change of control losses. And the majority of the court said there was a change of control here. There was very clearly a completely different business, and that's why we agree that you cannot get the loss carry forwards, right? And the majority decision, there was one dissenting decision that we'll look at in a moment, says the object and spirit of paragraph 111 of Article 111, paragraph 5 is to prevent corporations from being acquired by unrelated parties in order to deduct their unused losses against income from another business. Right? Dean's Knight underwent a fundamental transformation. It's true, right? That achieved the outcome that Parliament sought to prevent, which narrowly circumvented the text of Article 111. That's what the Supreme Court decided, right? Without triggering the acquisition of control, because Matco only, remember, got the 35% of the shares, then there was 10 million shares issued, and then it acquired the other 65. Matco gained power of majority voting shareholder and fundamentally changed Dean's Knight's assets, liabilities, shareholders, and businesses. And this was done through the investment agreement, right? So the court said the investment agreement equated you to a shareholder with control. This severed the continuity that is at the heart of the object and spirit and purpose of Article 111, paragraph 5. The result obtained by the transactions frustrated the rationale of Article 111, paragraph 5. The GAAR was a choice by Parliament to complement its specific anti-avoidance efforts with the enactment of a general rule. So the GAAR said, you know, if you manage to get out under Article 111, paragraph 5, we can still get you under the anti-abuse, the general anti-abuse test, right? Understanding the provisions purpose is central to the GAAR analysis. Once the object, spirit, and purpose has been ascertained, the abuse analysis focuses on whether the result of transaction frustrates the provision's object, spirit, and purpose. Courts must go beyond the legal form and technical compliance of the transactions. They must compare the result of the transactions to the underlying rationale of the provision and determine whether the rationale has been frustrated. In coming to such a conclusion, the abusive nature of the transaction must be clear. And so what the Supreme Court decided here was it is quite clear that there was an abusive transaction with Matco.